What started as a friendly late-night interview between Snoop Dogg and Jimmy Kimmel quickly unraveled into something no one saw coming. Beneath the laughter and bright studio lights, a silent war was brewing, one that would explode live on air. Was it just a conversation gone wrong? Or did Snoop finally expose something much deeper about how media handles black voices? Stay with us, because this isn't just about two men. It's about the system behind the smile. You've come a long way from gangster rap to making pancakes with Martha Stewart. The audience laughed. That familiar, warm studio laughter that told everyone it was okay to find this moment funny, safe, polished, late-night digestible. Jimmy Kimmel leaned back in his chair with that trademark grin, glancing at the crowd like a magician who'd just pulled a dove out of his sleeve. The band chuckled lightly in the corner. Cameras panned smoothly between the desk, the guest chair, and the man now sitting in it, silent, poised, unreadable. Snoop Dogg didn't laugh. He sat perfectly still in a tailored black suit, a crisp white shirt buttoned to the collar, no chains, no shades, no smoke curling into the air. His posture was relaxed, almost regal, but there was something taut beneath the stillness, like the quiet hum before a subwoofer drops. He glanced toward the crowd and gave a faint smile. Not the broad, jokey grin that fans were used to, but the kind of smile you give someone right before you tell them you remember everything they thought you'd forgotten. Jimmy leaned forward, hands folded like a pastor about to give a benediction. Look at you now. The icon, the businessman, the family man. I mean, seriously, it's crazy. I've known you a long time, Snoop. And I got to say, seeing where you are now, it's amazing. Like, you're the American dream, man. Another wave of applause. Another safe, well-lit moment. And yet, something off. If anyone had been watching closely, really watching, they might have noticed that Snoop's eyes didn't quite match the smile he gave. Not cold, not angry, just distant, as if he wasn't here for the praise. As if he'd heard this intro before. 1,000 different ways. Always from the other side of a desk. He nodded once. Appreciate that. His voice was low, even unshaken. Jimmy picked up on the brevity and did what he was trained to do. Pivot. Smooth it out. I mean, you've got a wine label, cookbooks, youth football leagues, Weed Empire, commercials, NFTs, documentaries. My writers couldn't even list it all. And now, Grandpa Mode 2, man. You're making the rest of us look bad. A small chuckle rolled through the audience. Still, Snoop didn't take the bait. He didn't toss back a one-liner. Didn't give the meme moment. He sat with it. Let the list hang in the air like a resume read at a funeral. His eyes scanned Jimmy slowly. Not with hostility, but with that quiet, knowing patience of a man who had survived both applause and assassination attempts, sometimes in the same week. I move, Snoop said finally. That's what I do. Jimmy grinned, sensing a moment he could grab. You sure do. Some of us can't keep up. I'm just glad you moved this way. You know, to this version of you, the friendly one, makes my job easier. The studio lights didn't flicker, but something else did. The temperature in the room, the rhythm of the crowd, a pause that felt just half a second too long. Snoop tilted his head slightly. What version is that, Jimmy? His tone was smooth, casual, not accusatory, but surgical. Jimmy, perhaps not hearing the blade beneath the velvet, laughed. You know, the one that smiles, that does baking shows and national ads and holiday specials. The cuddly one this time. The audience hesitated. A few unsure chuckles, a few murmurs. Snoop nodded again, more to himself than anyone else. Jimmy caught it and backpedaled, not fully, just a step. I mean that in the best way, like you've evolved. People love you now. My mom loves you. It's cool. Snoop looked out at the studio, scanning faces like they were exhibits behind glass. Then he turned back, leaned forward slightly. He didn't smile. Crazy what makes people love you, he said quietly. Jimmy blinked. What do you mean? Snoop didn't answer right away. He shifted slightly in his chair, just enough to draw focus back to the silence between the words. The crowd waited. The crew held still. Jimmy's grin remained, but it had begun to hollow just slightly. I mean, Snoop said, slow and deliberate. It's crazy what success makes people forget. No one laughed. Jimmy moved to shuffle his note cards, but his fingers paused for a fraction too long. That moment when every part of the room realizes something is coming. Something real, something unscripted. And for the first time since he'd walked out onto that stage, Snoop Dogg looked directly into the camera, his eyes calm, his mouth still. The show had only just begun. Guess it's easier to hug Snoop when he's selling cereal. The laugh that followed wasn't full. It started out of habit, a polite chuckle from the audience, the kind they'd been conditioned to deliver. But it never reached full bloom. It wavered midway, like a note that loses its pitch. A few people glanced at each other. Not everyone understood why it felt off, but they felt it. Jimmy leaned back, drumming his fingers lightly on the desk. That same smile played on his lips. Not cruel, not mean, but performative. The kind of grin you wear when you're sure you've said something edgy enough to be clever, but not enough to cost you anything. He waited for Snoop to clap back, to throw him a joke, to rescue the moment with that effortless cool the world had come to love. But Snoop didn't move. He stayed, leaned slightly forward in his chair, elbows resting lightly on his thighs, palms together, his fingers interlaced slowly, deliberately, as if keeping time with a different rhythm than the one playing in the studio. The silence extended, just long enough to be uncomfortable, just long enough to draw focus. Jimmy filled it. "I mean it as a compliment," he said quickly. "You've built an empire, man. You're everywhere. Endorsements, family-friendly shows. Kids love you now. You're like the most lovable rapper in history. That's not easy." Snoop nodded, the gesture almost imperceptible. "I hear you," he said. Jimmy smiled again. "Do you ever think about that? About how much you've changed? I mean, back in the day, you were scary, man. You were dangerous. Now my daughter's got a Snoop plushie. You went from gangster to grandpa." A few chuckles, mostly nervous this time. Snoop leaned back slowly, letting the chair accept his weight. His gaze remained fixed on Jimmy. "You think I changed?" he asked. Jimmy shrugged. "Didn't you?" There was no malice in the question. That was the part that made it worse. It came coded in that soft, disarming tone late-night hosts master over years. The tone that says, this isn't confrontation. It's just conversation. But the knife was there, shining beneath the smile. Snoop exhaled, not a sigh, just breath released carefully. "I changed what I had to change," he said. "Not who I am." Jimmy nodded like he understood, but he didn't. "It's just wild," he went on. "Because when I watch you now doing those commercials, being on game shows, cooking with Martha, it's like you're this whole other version. Do you ever feel like you've become, I don't know, more of a brand than a person?" The words hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't dissipate. Snoop didn't answer right away. He looked past Jimmy for a moment, as if something on the far wall of the studio held his attention. Then his eyes returned. "Locked in. Depends who's doing the looking," he said. Jimmy chuckled, relieved. There it was. A comeback. A line. Maybe that was the wave back to safe waters. But Snoop wasn't finished. "See, folks look at me and see two things," he continued, his voice low and smooth. "What they feared and what they think they fixed." Jimmy blinked. Snoop went on. "They see who I was, and they see what I've been packaged into. They don't see who I am, because who I am makes people uncomfortable. And uncomfortable don't sell breakfast cereal." The audience was quiet. Even the crew had stilled. Only the red lights on the cameras blinked in rhythm, recording it all. Jimmy shifted in his seat. He smiled again, this time thinner. "Well, I just think it's awesome that you've reached so many people. Doesn't matter how they found you, right?" Snoop tilted his head slightly. "Doesn't it?" Jimmy raised his eyebrows, uncertain whether it was rhetorical. Snoop pressed. "If I have to be harmless for people to hear me, were they ever listening in the first place?" Jimmy held his hands up in mock surrender. "Hey, I'm not trying to put you in a box, man." Snoop gave the slightest laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You already did," he said, just painted it with smiles. That one landed. There was a shift then, not in the words, but in the air. The energy had changed. The crowd could feel it now. This wasn't just an interview. This was a line being drawn, quietly, precisely. Not a fight, not yet. But something had cracked. Jimmy shuffled his note cards. The motion wasn't nervous, but it wasn't smooth either. He looked up again, tried to find the thread. "Well, I guess you've always been a man of reinvention," he said lightly. Snoop looked at him, calm and steady. "No," he said. "I've always been a man of survival." And now it was Jimmy who didn't speak. Just a heartbeat, a hesitation. The band stayed quiet. The crowd held its breath. And somewhere behind the lights, the truth began to edge forward, ready to step onto the stage. "You know what I admire, Snoop? America forgave you. I mean, you went from felon to family favorite. That's wild, man." Jimmy said it with the same wide grin he wore when delivering a punchline. But the words didn't land like a joke. Not this time. They hung there, heavy and off-key, like a wrong note played too loud in a quiet room. A few uneasy chuckles drifted from the audience, then silence. Snoop didn't flinch. He looked at Jimmy with the same calm as before, but something behind his eyes shifted. Not anger, not surprise, just a deeper stillness. A kind of quiet that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. Jimmy seemed to realize he'd miscalculated, but it was too late to backpedal without drawing more attention. So he leaned in, as if doubling down might smooth the edge. I mean that as a compliment, he added quickly. You've come a long way. People love you now. They trust you. That's a big deal, man. Not everyone gets that chance. Snoop nodded slowly, like he was giving Jimmy space to finish digging. You're right, he said, voice even. Not everyone gets that chance. Jimmy smiled again, relieved at the agreement, not noticing the edge in Snoop's tone. He moved to pick up another card, but Snoop leaned forward before he could speak. But let's be clear, Snoop said. I didn't come here to be congratulated for surviving. Jimmy blinked. Well, I didn't come here, Snoop continued, still calm, to be held up as proof that the system works or that America forgives. He paused, letting the silence speak for itself. You called me here to perform gratitude, not to speak. That landed. The temperature in the room dropped. Jimmy tried to laugh it off. No, come on. I mean, this is a celebration. Look how far you've come. That's inspiring. Snoop tilted his head just slightly. You ever ask yourself what I had to walk through just to sit here? Jimmy opened his mouth, then closed it. Snoop kept going. You ever wonder how many headlines, courtrooms, funerals, and false apologies it took for me to become inspiring enough for your couch? The audience wasn't laughing anymore. They were listening. Really listening. Snoop's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. His words were sharp enough without volume. You think forgiveness is a reward, he said. But it's a performance. And I've been playing that role for too long. Jimmy shifted in his seat. His grin now looked more like a reflex than a feeling. Snoop looked out at the crowd, then back to Jimmy. See, it's easy to forgive me now, he said. Because I make you money. Because I make you laugh. Because I play nice. But back then, when I was speaking raw, unfiltered, angry, you weren't reaching out. America wasn't handing me a second chance. I had to take it. And I had to wear it the way. You wanted me to. Jimmy tried to interject. That's not fair. Snoop cut him with a look. Not harsh, just final. You didn't forgive me, Jimmy. You repackaged me. The silence that followed felt like glass cracking. Jimmy straightened in his chair. Look, man, I think you're being a little unfair here. I'm not trying to diminish your story. I respect you. Snoop nodded. I know you do. In the way people respect furniture that used to be firewood, as long as it's polished. Jimmy chuckled nervously. You're going deep tonight. Snoop didn't smile. It's funny, he said. How deep sounds like too much only when it's true. Jimmy ran a hand over his desk, searching for a reset. You want to talk about truth? He said. Okay. The truth is people change. You change for the better. That should be celebrated. Snoop's eyes narrowed slightly. You ever think maybe the truth didn't change? Maybe your tolerance did. Jimmy didn't answer. Snoop leaned back again, his posture easy, but the weight in his words was heavier now. I wasn't saved by America, Jimmy. I survived it. One breath passed, then another. And now I'm supposed to say thank you. Smile wide. Be grateful that the people who feared me now find me funny. That the world that once called me a threat now sells me as safe. Jimmy tried again to find levity. Well, look, you've got your own show, your own brand. You're not just safe, you're successful. Snoop looked at him one last time, and something in his face closed. You don't get to define my success, Jimmy. Not when you only see me as healed if I'm silent, or safe if I'm edited. And for the first time that night, the audience didn't know whether to clap or sit completely still, because the show had turned. And now the guest wasn't here to be celebrated. He was here to testify. You don't want me here. You want a mascot. Snoop said it without raising his voice. But it didn't need volume. It landed like truth always does, quietly, but with a weight that rearranged the air. Jimmy blinked. It wasn't the words exactly. It was the certainty behind them. The conviction that stripped away performance and left only recognition. Jimmy laughed, nervous and dry. Hey, come on, man. I'm just asking questions. Things people are curious about. It's not personal. Snoop tilted his head slowly, studying him. Not with anger, not even with judgment, just precision. Curious, he repeated. Yeah, Jimmy said quickly, latching onto the word like it might float. You know, people want to know what it's like. How you made that transition from where you started to where you are now. Snoop leaned forward, hands laced in front of him. The room seemed to shrink. The studio lights stayed warm. But something about the air grew sharp. You mean, Snoop said, How I went from threat to theme park. Jimmy hesitated. That's not what I said. No, Snoop replied. But that's what you meant. Jimmy tried to smile, tried to soften the moment again. Look, I think it's amazing. You've become this cross-generational figure. That's rare. It's admirable. Snoop let the silence stretch. The smile faded from Jimmy's face. You know what else is rare? Snoop said finally. A black man allowed to age in public without being turned into a caricature or a cautionary tale. Jimmy sat still, unsure where to go. Snoop's voice didn't shift, but its edges sharpened. You want me polished? You want me grinning? You want the parts of me that you can broadcast at 11:35 without someone in Kansas reaching for the remote? Jimmy tried again, softer now. Look, man, I'm just trying to have a good conversation, that's all. Snoop turned slightly in his chair, looked toward the cameras, then back at Jimmy. You call this a conversation? Yeah, Jimmy said, defensive now. You're here. I'm here. We're talking. That's the show. Snoop nodded slowly, then raised a finger and pointed toward the cue cards resting just behind Jimmy's desk. The camera caught the movement. The audience followed his gaze. What's on those cards, Jimmy? Jimmy blinked. What? Your questions. Your curiosities. What's written on them? Jimmy hesitated, glanced down at the desk, then looked back up. It's just structure. Bullet points. Snoop leaned in, voice quiet but cutting. Felon to family favorite. Dangerous to Disney. Redemption arc safe Snoop. Marketable black man. You planned this. The setup was scripted. The crowd stirred. Uneasy now. Jimmy held up a hand, stammered. That's not fair. Snoop didn't move. You want me here? He said. But not the whole of me. Not the part that remembers being hunted. Not the part that buried friends. Not the part that's still angry about systems you joke about like punchlines. I don't joke about that. You do, Snoop said calmly. You just don't notice it because to you it's a segment. To me it's scars. Jimmy looked around the studio, as if hoping someone would throw him a line. The band stayed silent. The audience was no longer sure whether to react. The only thing moving was the blinking red light of the main camera, recording everything. You smile through it, Snoop said. That's what white comfort looks like, questions dipped in bleach and served with a grin. The line struck the room like thunder behind closed doors. Jimmy's posture faltered for just a second. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I just think people need to hear your story. Snoop stared at him. You think you're giving me a platform, he said. But you're giving yourself protection. You get to say you sat across from me, that you let me speak, but only within your frame, within your runtime, your network notes, your comfort zone. I don't have an agenda. We all have an agenda, Snoop said. Yours is to make me look safe. Mine is to remind you I'm not. Jimmy swallowed hard. His voice came out smaller than usual. Then why come on the show? Snoop sat back, looked at the lights, the crowd, the crew, then back at Jimmy. To see if you'd prove me right. For a moment, no one moved. Then Snoop leaned forward again, voice quiet, razor sharp. You don't want a guest. You want a symbol that doesn't talk back. You want to say my name, but not hear my voice. You want the story of how I changed, as long as it doesn't make you uncomfortable about how little. The world around me did. Jimmy exhaled. It wasn't a sigh, more like deflation. I don't think that's true, he said. Snoop offered something close to a smile, but it wasn't warm. You don't have to think it's true. You just have to benefit from it. And with that, the silence returned. But it was different now. Heavier, tense. The audience wasn't breathing. The cameras were still. Even the lights seemed to dim under the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't a talk show anymore. It was something else, something real, something dangerous. And no one in that room, not Jimmy, not the audience, not even the cameras, could look away. You laughed at the punchlines, but they were made from wounds. Snoop turned his head toward the audience as he said it, not to accuse, but to reveal, not with a shout, but with the quiet weight of someone who had seen this room before. In 1,000 different forms, bright lights, applause signs, faces trained to laugh when the rhythm says so, but not when it hurts. Never when it hurts. The audience shifted. Some physically, some just in their silence. The kind of silence that comes not from not knowing what to say, but from realizing you might not be the good guy in the scene you thought was funny. Jimmy tried to cut in. His voice rose, not in anger, but in urgency. A man trying to stop the bleeding of his own show. Come on, man. Don't do this. You know I respect you. Snoop didn't look at him. Not yet. His eyes were still scanning the crowd, not searching for a face, just letting the silence sit with them a little longer. He let it grow legs. Let it move into the cracks between the chairs and settle into the nervous breath of the room. Then he turned back to Jimmy. "You don't respect me," he said. Each word measured, scalpel sharp. "You respect how easy I've made you feel about ignoring what I survived." Jimmy blinked. His lips parted like he had something to say, but nothing came out. And Snoop didn't wait. "You respected me when I was charming. When I fit your monologue, when I danced around the truth, just enough for you to laugh, but not enough for you to feel it." The audience was dead quiet now. The band wasn't moving. The lights hadn't dimmed, but it felt darker anyway. "You respected me," Snoop continued. "As long as I didn't talk about the nights, I didn't think I'd make it home. The time I held my brother's body in my arms, the funerals I attended before I was old enough to drink. The cuffs, the trials, the media calling me everything but a man." He turned slightly again, his voice still low, but rising in gravity. "Respect that comes with conditions isn't respect. It's decoration. It's performance. It's you clapping with bloodied hands." No one moved. Snoop shifted his weight in the chair. He looked toward the audience again, not accusing, just placing a mirror. "You laughed when I joked about gangster life, about courtrooms, about being shot at because I made it sound like a movie. You didn't see the morgues, the court transcripts, the mothers. I couldn't look in the eye." A woman in the third row looked down. Snoop saw it. Not to shame her, but to show that the room was listening. "Now, you didn't laugh because it was funny," he said. "You laughed because I made it bearable for you." Jimmy sat back slightly, palms on the desk now, not knowing where to put them. "I get it," he said, almost a whisper. "We all cope. We all perform. That's what this is, a show." Snoop's eyes locked onto him. Nina Simone said, "An artist's duty is to reflect the times in which we live. You want performance. I want reflection." Jimmy nodded slowly, unsure if it was agreement or surrender. "You know what happens," Snoop said, "when a black artist stops performing and starts reflecting?" Jimmy didn't answer. "They get called bitter, angry, divisive, difficult, dangerous." Snoop sat still for a second longer, then leaned forward just slightly. "Malcolm X said, 'The most disrespected person in America is the black woman. The second is the black man.' You know why?" Jimmy stayed silent because we're only allowed to be one of three things: entertainment, threat, or ghost. A slow breath moved through the studio, and I chose not to be any of them. Now he looked out at the whole room, at the cameras, at the crew. "I came here tonight knowing exactly what this was. I didn't walk in blind. You don't survive this long in this skin being naive." Jimmy opened his mouth again. "I didn't." Snoop cut him off. Gentle but final. "You didn't mean harm. I know that's the scariest part." That line sank like stone. "You think because you smiled, it couldn't be violence. You think because you were polite, it couldn't be harm. But you rehearsed those questions. You printed the cue cards. You approved the segment title. Redemption and reinvention." Jimmy's face dropped slightly. "You wanted to sell the idea that I'm better now, that I'm cleaner, that I'm marketable, that I've risen above." Snoop shook his head. "I haven't risen above. I'm still standing in it. I just learned how to walk without bleeding." He took a pause, not for effect, just to breathe. The audience didn't make a sound. The crew didn't move. Jimmy sat still, hands folded like a man in church after a sermon he didn't expect. "You want to talk about respect?" Snoop said, looking directly at him. "Then hear me now. Without applause, without edits, without a joke to wrap it all up." He pointed once gently toward the cameras. "Respect means listening when I'm not smiling. Respect means letting me be whole. Even when it's inconvenient, even when it ruins your segment." And then quieter now, but deeper. "Respect means letting me hurt in public without needing me to make it pretty for you." He looked down at the floor for just a second, just enough to make the silence feel heavier. Then he looked up again. "I'm not mad, Jimmy. I'm awake, and I've been awake a long time." Jimmy swallowed hard. There was nothing left to say. Only the red light on the camera blinked. Still rolling, still alive, and now finally telling the truth. Snoop reached up slowly and unclipped the microphone from his jacket. No rush, no drama, just a quiet, deliberate movement that felt louder than anything he'd said. The small pop of audio disconnect echoed faintly in the silence. He placed the mic on the armrest beside him, then sat back for a second, eyes scanning the room one last time. Jimmy shifted in his seat. "Snoop, look, maybe we got off track here," he said, his voice soft, searching for the landing gear he no longer had. Snoop didn't answer. He rose to his feet with a fluid grace that made the chair creak under the sudden absence of weight. He stood tall beneath the studio lights, the tailored suit still perfectly crisp. The silence wrapped around him like a tailored cloak. Then he looked directly at the camera. His voice came low, but clear enough to cut the tension like glass. "Tonight on Jimmy Kimmel," he said, echoing the familiar cadence. "We celebrate success. Sanitized, edited, and safe." There was a flicker in the control room. A camera operator hesitated before adjusting the angle. One of the producers behind the scenes mouthed something to attack, but no one moved. No one dared cut to commercial. Not yet. Snoop walked slowly toward Jimmy's desk, not in anger. Not with the fire of confrontation, but with the weight of finality. Like a man finishing something that never should have started this way. He stopped just short of the desk, looking down at Jimmy, who now sat quietly, his hands still folded, the note cards untouched, as if even they knew their moment had passed. Snoop reached into his jacket pocket. What he pulled out wasn't flashy. It wasn't staged. It was a simple red bandana worn but folded neatly. Edges frayed just slightly with time. The kind of item that said more than a speech ever could. He looked at it for a moment in his palm, then placed it gently on the desk right in front of Jimmy. Jimmy didn't reach for it. He didn't speak. He just stared. The audience had gone completely still. Even breath felt like it would break the moment. Snoop stood there for one beat longer. Two. Then he spoke, quiet and final. "You wanted the symbol," he said, his voice low but steady. "Not the soul." No one moved. Jimmy didn't respond. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. There was no comeback for this. No cue card for when a man places his entire history on your desk and walks away. Snoop turned then, not abruptly, but with the calm of someone who had nothing left to prove. Each step echoed softly across the stage, the soles of his shoes tapping against the polished floor. No music played, no applause followed. The band sat frozen behind their instruments. He passed the audience without looking, past the cameras, still rolling, still red-eyed and unblinking. The exit door stood at the edge of the set, bathed in neutral light, unremarkable in any other moment. But this was not any other moment. He didn't look back. The door closed behind him with a soft, final sound. Back at the desk, Jimmy remained still. The bandana sat untouched. The cue cards lay face down beside it. He stared at both for a long while, as if either one might offer a script he no longer had. The crowd didn't know whether to clap. No one in the booth dared give the signal. The show was technically still on. But no one in that studio believed that anymore. Snoop had ended it without permission. And in doing so, he had taken back something far more powerful than a segment. He had taken back the story. The clip hit social media before the show even ended. A 30-second cut taken from a phone in the third row. Shaky and raw. Snoop placing the red bandana on Jimmy's desk. That final line. "You wanted the symbol, not the soul." Then the walk-off. The door clicking shut. Silence. By the time the East Coast airing finished, Snoop walk-off was trending at #1. Within an hour, the internet had done what it always does, fractured, polarized, set ablaze. Some praised him, called it the most powerful moment in late-night television history, said it was about time someone shattered the veneer of politeness that protected conversations from becoming truths. They clipped quotes, turned his words into graphics. Some even tattooed the line, "You don't want a guest, you want a mascot." It became gospel in corners of the culture, where people had been waiting too long to hear someone say it out loud. Others recoiled. Headlines appeared. Snoop Dogg explodes on Jimmy Kimmel. Rapper goes off the rails in heated interview. Unprofessional meltdown or calculated political stunt? Fox News ran a full-panel discussion. One anchor called it another example of woke performance art disguised as victimhood. Another said he was invited, welcomed, celebrated, and still chose to burn it down. A split-screen America watched itself arguing. On one side, he told the truth. On the other, he made it political. Some said he ruined his brand. Others said he reclaimed it. But underneath all the noise, something quieter took root. In classrooms, dorms, barbershops, back seats, back rooms, people started asking questions they hadn't asked before. Not about Snoop. About the system. About the rules. About how often someone has to smile to be allowed to stay. About the line between performance and peace. Black creators clipped the footage and layered it with jazz, with spoken word, with old protest footage and new faces. It became something else, a beat, a sermon, a montage. The bandana became a symbol not of gangs, but of refusal, of memory, of self. And Jimmy, he didn't speak for 2 days. When he finally did, It was a carefully worded statement. Respect. Misunderstanding. Different perspectives. A promise to reflect. A vague apology for the way the tone may have shifted. It satisfied no one. But then again, it wasn't meant to. The conversation had already moved on. Because what Snoop said wasn't a moment. It was a mirror. And America didn't know what to do with what it saw. A voiceover began circulating online. It was pulled from the broadcast, layered over slow black and white footage of the moment he stood, removed the mic, placed the cloth, and walked off stage. It ended like this. If survival means silence, some of us choose fire, not forgiveness. And people listened. Not just watched. Not just liked. They listened. Because something had cracked. And through the fracture, the truth had finally stepped.